أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم.
والسابقون الأولون من المهاجرين والأنصار والذين اتبعوهم بإحسان رضي الله عنهم ورضوا عنه وأعد لهم جنات تجري تحتها الأنهار خالدين فيها أبدا ذلك الفوز العظيم.
الله أكبر كبيرا والحمد لله كثيرا وسبحان الله بكرة وأصيلا لا إله إلا الله وحده صدق وعده ونصر عبده وأعز جنده وهزم الأحزاب وحده.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Going on and continuing what I was saying last time about the idea of government and how uneducated we are of it. And not by coincidence or fault, now with all this uncertainty of what are proper liberties and rights, it brings up some particular questions, and it really does shine a light on our nature and purpose. Like, for example, can other human beings or any bigwig bureaucrat sitting down in comforted offices and well-furnished establishments really tell you what your rights and liberties are? Then from it give us our values? If we start from a base principle, we can all agree that our worth is equivalent to our cost. So if you're eating to live and just thrive on that, it really proves a point. With that being said, is it possible for us to determine a one-for-all set principles to create order amongst ourselves, and nevertheless, can we really follow through with them without amending it, of course? I mean, subhanAllah, we are confused about this, and we don't even want to bother of thinking about hukm. You could say that this edges on the purpose of life, and then say, well, I do what I want, and it's each for his own. This mistake is applied to common law, and it's not practical. And of course, there is a consequence for this, and it may not be immediate, and we are starting to see this today. Now I'm not going to go down the lane of Socratic questioning and senseless philosophy, where every sentence ends with a question mark, and you'd spend your days pondering, and every day you would come out more uncertain than the day before it. So it could be on the first day you would say, why do I exist? Then on the second day it's, what is existence? And if so, do I exist? And by the seventh day you would already be questioning your sanity, if you only knew by then what sanity was. Alhamdulillah, we're not going to do that, because for sure there is a simple constancy on how we should do things in life. And I'll see what I can cover and answer on this video. In the last video I was narrating along the way, but this time I'm going to continue playing some clips on the molding of education and ideological subversion, and summarize towards the end, inshallah.
Even needed. So I wonder, why did I even want this position? Sure, I earned it, but what will come of it? When I leave educational institutionalism, will I be successful or forever lost? I have no clue about what I want to do with my life. I have no interest because I saw every subject as a study, as work, and I excelled at every subject just for the purpose of excelling and not learning. And quite frankly, I'm very scared. John Taylor Gatto, a retired school teacher and activist critical of compulsory schooling, asserts, we could encourage the best qualities of youthfulness, curiosity, adventure, resilience, the capacity for surprising insight simply by being more flexible about time, texts, and tests, by introducing kids into truly competent adults, and by giving each student what autonomy he or she needs in order to take a risk every now and then. But we don't do that. Between these cinder block walls, we are all expected to be the same. We are trained to ace every standardized test, and those who deviate and see light through a different lens are worthless to the scheme of public education, and therefore viewed with contempt. H.L. Mencken Lincoln wrote in the American Mercury for April 1924 that the aim of public education is not to fill the young of this species with knowledge and awaken their intelligence, nothing could be further from the truth. The aim is simply to reduce as many individuals as possible to the same safe level, to breed and train a standardized citizenry, to put down dissent and originality. That is the aim in the United States. To illustrate this idea, doesn't it perturb you to learn about the idea of critical thinking? Is there really such a thing as uncritically thinking? To think is to process information in order to form an opinion. But if we are not critical when processing this information, are we really thinking? Or are we mindlessly accepting other opinions as truth? Our motivational force ought to be passion, but this is lost from the moment we step into a system that trains us rather than inspires us. We are more than robotic bookshelves, conditioned to blurt out facts we were taught in school. We are all very special. Every human on this planet is very special. So aren't we all deserving of something better? Of using our minds for innovation rather than memorization, for creativity rather than futile activity, for rumination rather than stagnation? We are not here to get a degree to then get a job so we can consume industry-approved placation after placation. There is more and more still. The saddest part is that the majority of students don't have the opportunity to reflect as I did. The majority of students are put through the same brainwashing techniques in order to create a complacent labor force working in the interests of large corporations and secretive government. And worst of all, they are completely unaware of it. I will never be able to turn back these 18 years. I can't run away to another country with a different education system, perhaps meant to enlighten rather than condition. This part of my life is over, and I want to make sure that no other child will have his or her potential suppressed by powers meant to exploit and control. We are human beings.
So, here we go. I had no idea that education would be any different from sort of what I'd had. I had had a good education, a private school education, but I didn't know. And so they go into the public school system in Camden, Maine, and in retrospect, I believe that that was a pilot school, one of them for the whole country, for changing our education system from an academic, classical educational system to brainwashing for the international socialist government. Everybody has all the research on this. I have so much. It's all in my book, The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America. I hit Camden and I start asking, I get on a little committee, philosophy committee, and we were all asked by the superintendent, highly skilled change agent out of Harvard, well, I want to know what all of you feel the purpose of education should be. And so I said, well, I think it should be to give the students a sound academic education in basics and also a strong sense of sound morals and values. And boom, they all looked at me and they said, whose values? And I thought, hey, what's going on here? I said, well, what's happened in my country? I mean, don't we still have the same values? I mean, what don't we all sort of agree? You don't steal, you don't rob, you don't kill babies, you don't kill people in war, a lot of things that I thought we believed in. You don't lie. Everything was changing, and I saw it, and I saw the curriculum coming in, and I went for the values clarification training myself to find out. I had a call from a master teacher who taught all over the world, and she said, you are absolutely correct. I was on the school board by that time. After 3 tries, I got on. And she said, you're absolutely correct. I want to pay for you to go for some in-service training. And I said, in what? And she said, well, it's called Innovations in Education, and it's how to become a change agent. She paid $100 for me to go. I went. And all these normal-looking people, nice, some from my own school district and all, and the guy is a facilitator, but he's using this big book called Innovations in Education, a Change Agent's Guide, and it has all these case studies of teachers and administrators and how to sneak in controversial curriculum such as death ed, sex ed, bullying ed, alcohol ed, drug ed, all these programs that have education hanging off the end of them. They have nothing to do with education. It's interesting. You don't have math ed and science ed and all. They call it math and science and history, right? But when you see anything with education hanging off the end of it, red flag, huh? In that training, he taught us how to identify resistors in our community. And they were the people who were smart, who knew that these programs were designed for nothing other than to make children engage in sex, to drink, to take drugs, to do all the things that the parents were being told the programs were to help the children. I was considered a resistor too. Here they were training me to identify myself, huh? And so I never, ever got over that. Also, we were being trained to go to the important people in the community, and they're really very good people. We all know who they are. They're friends of ours and all, but they're head of Rotary, head of Garden Club, head of Historical Society. You go to them and you explain to them in very, very good, highly skilled change agent manner, which is just lies, how important these programs are for your children. We've got to put these programs in. This was 1973, all the way through right now. Huh? That period in education, we call it the unfreezing of our children's values, the ones taught by the parents at home and the church, basically. Change agents were highly trained by the National Training Laboratories. We had the headquarters for that in Bethel, Maine. That goes all the way back to World War II. I have the original paper from that, and it said that what they're putting in is they want to change the values to unfreeze the system, and then they're going to implement the new values, the new communist values for world government. So that was the goal, and they did a good job on it between 1970 and the year 2000. And now the values, as we can all see, people are saying, oh, well, we've got to be tolerant, there are no absolutes anymore. That's not fair to judge people. Don't be judgmental. If your grandmother is dying of cancer and can't afford the medicine, it's okay to steal it. That's what you call values clarification with the education for a planned economy, using workforce training, identifying children at a very early age, what they're going to do the rest of their lives. It's the Soviet planned economic system, starting as early as first grade. That's being put in now under the guise of school choice, charter schools, and using the performance-based, outcome-based Skinnerian Pavlovian method with a computer. Pavlov, interestingly enough, was a Russian. People think that he invented operant conditioning. He didn't. He went to Leipzig, Germany, and he studied under Wilhelm Wundt in the 1800s, mid-1800s. Wilhelm Wundt was a philosopher, German philosopher, who was involved in trying to figure out how you can get people to do change, understanding the psychology, what makes people click, how you can get them to do what you want them to do, etc. And he became very frustrated with the inability to change people's behavior and their views and everything, doing the traditional way, lectures and this and that and all, and discussions and all. And finally, he realized that what he was dealing with was the human soul. The soul is a very difficult thing to track. It sort of floats all over the place, and it rebels, and it doesn't, it's independent. And so he came up with a scheme to attack the nervous system. That's really what it is. It's neurological. If you can get them to react in certain ways to what you want, like when the doctor, give you a good idea, the doctor used to, physical exams, they take a hammer, a little rubber thing, and knock your knee, and it goes boop. So he figured, well, you know what? We can operate on that thesis where we attack the nervous system, and it's a stimulus response thing. So you have to provide the stimulus in order to get the response. Well, if it was dog training, the stimulus would be a dog biscuit or something, and ultimately, when the dog sees you taking the biscuit out of the box, he's going to do what you want, right? And so it's really pretty simple. I had never gotten involved in having to figure it out until a very good friend of mine, a teacher in Arizona, had to go through the first program that was brought out of 1965. One of the first ones, it was called Mastery Learning. And she quit education when she went through the training. She said it was so sick, and she had papers from doctors and all saying it even makes children sick. And I met her when I went into the U.S. Department of Ed because I found her correspondence came to my office, and it was referred to me, and that was how I met her. And she was the one who educated me about upward conditioning and how awful it is. I mean, it can absolutely destroy free will. We had free will until we got to the computer. The computer absolutely destroys. The child there's no thinking going on there. There's no transfer being made. And you've got to understand that. All the documents in regard to this by people, not myself, by educators who have been trained in it, are in my book. So you don't have to say Charlotte said that. You can say Professor so-and-so said that. I have one incredible paper in the back of my book by a leading educator written in the 60s that I managed to get. It was attached to the Project BEST application for funding that I talked about, the one I got fired for. And that paper talks about the need for computers and how wonderful they're going to be and all. But he says, if you don't agree with the message morally and ethically that's going on to that software, do not do it. And that's coming right out of the mouth of an educator involved in it. He says you have to have a conscience, because that software is so powerful that no matter, you may think, oh, well, the person on the other end, he can do what he wants and make up. No. Once it's in the software, and once the child is clicking away on the computer and getting the little happy face as the reward, that's what happens. We all know that feeling when we get something good on the computer. He's not going to ask any questions. That's it. Finished. And it can bring the student to a certain totally opposite position in their thinking using Socratic questioning.
Outcome-based education has some flaws to it. When we asked the department, would you please give us your research base, they declined to do that. They told us that this was the best instincts of educators right now, and so we should just trust them, that this was going to make it better. So we did our own research, and we found that in 1987, Johns Hopkins University issued a study saying outcome-based education doesn't work. And we found it was real expensive. Now, when you think about that, it makes a lot of sense. If I took any 4 people in my classroom, I'm the teacher, I only have 4 students, and I teach the lesson, and I test you. 1 of you will pass the test, 3 of you won't. That means I've got to go back and reteach the 3 who didn't pass the test. What do I do with that one? Well, that one can sit and wait. That one can become a peer tutor and help teach one of the other 3. Or I have to bring in a second teacher to teach the child who passed the test the first time. Who pays for that second teacher? I teach the lesson one more time. I give the test one more time to the 3. 1 more passes. Now I've got 1 here, 2 here. Do I need 2 more teachers? Do I have 2 peer tutors? Do they sit and wait? Peer tutoring, I have 5 children. I did not send them to school to be the teacher. I sent them to school to be the student. If they're teaching someone else something they already know, they're not learning something new, are they? They're stuck. So outcome-based education takes the top off of achievement. In Pittsburgh the other night we had a town meeting, and it was more of a debate setting, and one of the presenters for those promoting the idea was a professor from the University of Pittsburgh, and he said the only people objecting to this are people who have good students in their families. That's a very telling statement, because it brings the achievement down. Now, I thought, gee, surely the people promoting this know that this isn't such a good idea. What are they going to do with all of these kids that eventually I'm going to have 30 children in 30 different places? Obviously, I can't have 30 teachers in this classroom. So there must be a plan. When we started pulling the grants out of the New American Schools Development Corporation, we found out that there was indeed a plan. It's called computer-assisted instruction. Each child is tied into a computer, and the computer will serve up the learning nugget that the child must master in order to show that that they've met the goal and can keep on going. Well, if you're tied into a computer, who programs the computer? And how do we know that the computer's serving up the right learning nugget? When we pulled one of the grants, it was called from the Center for New West Learning. Here's the learner. The query is the question, goes into the computer. The computer accesses, in order to come up with the individualized lesson plan, the computer accesses biographical data and learning styles, student information module. I didn't know what that was. So I decided I should look, because what is this computer accessing on my child to serve up the learning nugget? What is a learning style? What is the biographical data? Where did it go? Where did it come from? And who has access to it? And what we found out was that, in fact, the state is compiling data banks at a micro record level. That means that it's available on an individual child. And the state is not doing that by itself. The data banks are being mandated by the federal government through something called the National Center for Education Statistics Common Core of Data. This is the federal data bank. There are 10 handbooks. This handbook is called Student Pupil Accounting. It was first printed in the 1960s. It was updated in the 1970s. This is the 1976 edition, which is the current edition. We have personal identification, name, student number, sex, racial and ethnic group, birth and age date, minor adult status, family responsibility, citizenship, language considerations, veteran benefits, family and residence, parents, male parent, female parent, sponsor, that's if someone sponsored you to come into the country, responsible adult of domicile, perhaps you live with your aunt or your uncle or a grandparent or a brother or a sister instead of with your parents, brothers and sisters living in household, family economic information, family social cultural information, residence data, physical health, sensory and related conditions, student medical record number. That's the access number to all of the student medical files, including if you've ever been referred for a condition, all your physical exams. Did you ever abuse drugs? Mental, psychological, and proficiency test results and related student characteristics. The federal government defines a psychological test as a test of the student's personal adjustment and their stand on controversial issues. Referrals for schoolwork for emotional reasons, your mental and psychological characteristics, your effective styles of learning. All enrollments in any school, all school performance, post-school performance, non-school performance, what you do that is not in school, transportation data, any special assistance, did you ever qualify for a state or a federal education program? Now, this was one of 10 handbooks. There was one on staff accounting, there's one on property accounting, and what we found in the property accounting handbook was that it included a little graph that shows, this is the graph, that shows how all the data is linked. The data on the child can be linked to the data on the teacher, can be linked to data on the curriculum at an individual level, so that everything can be tracked. So I know that if Johnny, from this kind of a background, is in Mrs. Smith's class who has that kind of a background with textbook B, this is how Johnny's going to do. If I want to change Johnny's behavior, I can change his teacher, his textbook, or try to change something in his background. All the data is linked. This was the Property Accounting Handbook. Now, when we first started looking at this, we asked the state and then the federal government, were these used? And they said, oh, no, these were never used. This was just a proposal that we spent all this money printing, and it was never used. It was never part of anything. One federal official told us this has nothing to do with nothing. In the meantime, a parent in Pennsylvania had a child in a guidance program, and the guidance program included an activity on decision making, and the activity was a paper that the little girl who was in 7th grade had to fill out, and the paper, it was like a final exam, and if she didn't do it, she didn't pass the course, and the paper said, every family has some people who crave attention. Who in your family is the loudmouth? Every family has some people who are very competent. Who in your family meets that characteristic? Which would you rather be like? Why? The mom wasn't real happy with this particular curriculum thing, and so she objected. And she went to the school and she said, my daughter's not doing this. She's opting out of this activity and your class. And the school said, you can't do that because it's a mandated class, it's mandated by the state. And she said, oh, really? So she went to the state and she said, I'm opting out. This is against my principles, I don't agree with this, I don't like this, I'm opting my child out. And the state said, you can't opt out. It's mandated by the federal government through something called the Drug-Free Schools and Communities Act. Do you remember the Drug-Free Schools? We all thought that it was stopping drugs. This is the Drug-Free Schools and Communities Act. These are the 1992 guidelines from the Pennsylvania Department of Education. They're the same in every state. The Drug-Free Schools and Communities Act mandates what programming had to be brought in by the local school district in order to meet the state regulations which came from, ultimately, the federal government. It mandated that guidance services had to be provided. It mandated that psychological services had to be provided, that decision-making had to be provided, that self-esteem had to be provided. These were all mandated services. And when we look through the book, it gave us a whole list of what were called budget accounting, little codes with little numbers, talking about each of the services that had to be provided. So we went hunting for these numbers to see where did they come from. We found them in the National Center for Education Statistics Staff Accounting Handbook that was published in 1974. And they matched. Here are some of the Pennsylvania guidelines from the 1992 book, budget number 2143, Psychological Counseling Services. Federal government book, 1974, number 2143, Psychological Counseling Services. Language is identical. 2144, Psychotherapy Services. 2144, Psychotherapy Services. The only difference is that the 1992 edition has more numbers in it than the 1974 edition because they've updated the data banks. So are they using the 1970 National Center numbers? Yeah, they are. They are. Are they tracking our children? Yes, they are. The tracking now is in something called the Express. This is the Express. It's called the Exchange of Permanent Records Electronically for Students in Schools. This is the information that they compile on the children. This says that any education agency, local, state, or national, can access the data without parental knowledge or consent or notification. The data includes family unit number, all the people in your house, has your child ever been involved with a social service agency, all medical records, includes all performance, includes if they've ever had a behavioral problem, a discipline problem, and gives the receiving agency the name of a contact person and a phone number so they can call back to get more information that is not included in the data bank without parental knowledge or consent. It says that if it goes to a non-school agency, there has to be knowledge and consent. However, if it's going to an employer and the employer says, if you don't sign this, you don't get the job, how many people are going to withhold consent? This is the 1992 Express. Why? Well, if we go back to the New West Learning Center, and we go back to the learning styles and the biographical data, and then think about the goals. Ethical judgment, adaptability to change, self-esteem, family living, understanding others, proper environmental attitudes, citizenship, which, remember, the EQA, not factual knowledge, proper role for citizenship. The computer needs to be able to access where your child came from so they know what your child thinks, what your child believes, and how your child learns. That's your learning style. What's the best way to change the behavior? What's the best way to attack the attitude? And serves it back up to the child. Do you see parents on this graph? I don't either. What is the difference between what we had before and what the new regulations are? Before, with the EQA, the state had control down to the district level and could control curriculum planning, which was aimed at targeted subgroups of children. But we had children who did not conform. They said, no, I won't. Outcome-based education does not say the school will teach. It says the student must demonstrate. And through the computer, the control goes down to the individual child. Your child will conform, or they will not move forward. They will meet the goal. So where is it coming from? Where is the driving force? As we started tracing back, what we found was a report called the SCANS, Secretary's Commission on Achieving Necessary Skills. This is the 1992 edition. This was not written by the Secretary of Education. This was written by the Secretary of Labor. And this, I first saw this report in something I got from the University of Pittsburgh when they were implementing and teaching the implementation of the Pennsylvania regulations. And so we went back to the federal government and got the original. What we found is that it's not being driven by education. It's being driven by the big, big, big industries. That's who's driving the changes. When we read the scans talked all about what we need to have the proper worker of tomorrow. And the children were not referred to as children. They were referred to as human resource material, human capital.
After the war, the Carnegie Endowment trustees reasoned that if they could get control, here we go, of education in the United States, they would be able to prevent a return to the way of life as it had been prior to the war. And they recruited the Rockefeller Foundation to assist in such a monumental task. According to Dodd, quote, they divided the task in parts, giving to the Rockefeller Foundation the responsibility of altering education as it pertains to domestic subjects. That was the Southern Education Board they set up. But Carnegie retained the task of altering our education in foreign affairs and about international relations. That would be UNESCO, UN, all that stuff. The foundations decided that the most effective method of achieving this goal would be to alter American history. So they awarded grants, fellowships, and scholarships to those professors and historians who would rewrite American history and promote one worldism, humanism, and socialism. By the early 30s, the well-laid plans of the foundation trustees had reached fruition, and a Reece Committee staff report concluded, 1, that there had indeed been a non-bloody revolution in America between 1933 and 1936, 2, that a certain few foundations had funded efforts to change the beliefs of the American people through education and propaganda, and 3, that these revolutionary changes had been accepted without resistance. To demonstrate how thoroughly American opinion had been changed according to the plan of the foundations, we cite the following historical example. At the end of World War I, Woodrow Wilson and his shadowy alter ego, Colonel Edward M. House, tried to sell the U.S. Senate and the American people on the idea of the League of Nations. This was, of course, the first concerted international effort towards a one-world government. Wilson and House failed in their mission, but a generation later, after another great war and much re-education via college international relations clubs, international studies, educational grants, and the like, the Senate and the people readily accepted membership in the United Nations. Roosevelt's foreign policy advisor, Alger Hiss, helped write the UN Charter in which the Soviet Union was given 3 votes in the General Assembly and the United States only 1. And then before his perjury conviction for lying, that's Hiss, about his Soviet espionage activities, he went on to become president of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Chairman Reece expressed justifiable rage when he described what was happening as a diabolical conspiracy. Now, that's why teachers are up in arms about merit pay, performance-based pay. That's the same thing. They're going to pay the teachers for students getting good test scores. Now, wait a minute. First of all, you might think that sounds good. No, you got to ask yourself, what's the test? It's hard to believe that anybody would deliberately do this to children, but they are. They're evil people, and their agenda has been evil ever since this book was written. This is it. Proofs of a Conspiracy by John Robison, great Scottish scholar, back in 1798. He was a Scottish Freemason, and he went to France and studied, French Orient Masonry, and was so shocked by what he saw, it was so much worse than the Scottish Rite, that he went back and wrote that book, which he actually did give a copy to George Washington. That book is like a global education textbook being used in the American schools right now. It talks about 1798. This is after the French Revolution. Get rid of royalty, get rid of religion, get rid of the family. That's basically what's in the book. They talk about dropping borders. Sounds just like a global ed curriculum. Turning the children against their parents. It's pure communism. That's why I say that now, basically, the only thing that we can do, certainly with education, which is being turned into nothing but corporate school-to-work agenda, using the Soviet-Cuban Polytech system, where they pull the children out, send them over to the cigar factory, at noon to learn how to make cigars. The same thing here. That's being put in. It's been in the works for 30 years. The nail is going in the coffin right now. It's coming out of Europe. It's the program that's going through Maine right now. Is called Reinventing Education. De Lorenzo. This is all in my article, The Death of Free Will. All of this documentation about the final nail in the coffin, which will be school to work across the board for global corporate profits.